Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of DC Stargirl. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, obviously picking up where the last episode left off. Luckily, the cosmic staff, I guess it could sense that Sylvester was in trouble, or maybe it had been a while since he'd gotten back, so the staff was worried. So it woke Courtney up, blasting a hole through her pillow just to like make a point. Be like, yo, let's get up, let's go. Took him to the gambler's trailer and they found him. Luckily, he's okay. And I was actually surprised that he woke up as soon as I thought it might be a thing of like, oh, Sylvester's going to be out for a couple episodes. It's like, nope, he's up after a little while. I mean, granted, he never saw his attacker anyway, but Courtney kind of feels bad about all this because she kind of she starts blaming their agreements. Like, I made you agree to like, oh, like at nighttime it's my staff and during the day it's yours. Like, because of that, you didn't take the staff. But it's like, yeah, he wanted to be a better example. Like a lot of what Pat said last episode and kind of keeping with their agreement, wanted to be a better example to Courtney, ended up, you know, things kind of turning the way it is. But even so, Starman's still kind of bummed because like, no, I got ambushed. He's like, what is this, amateur hour? Like I was a top tier superhero and I got ambushed? Like, come on, like that shouldn't happen. I've never gotten ambushed like that before. So for him, it's kind of a blow to his ego too. So. But luckily, first and foremost, Beth's mom being there was kind of interesting. She's like, no, don't worry, I cover. They were like, oh, say it was a hit and run. She was like, oh, what, they're not supposed to do? It's like, yeah, because when you say it's a hit run, now the cops and everyone are going to be looking for an actual driver. And it's like, oh, sorry. It's like, well, what should I say? It's like, oh, say he hit a tree. And it's like, wait, what? It's like, Courtney being like, that's what we said that happened to me. And it's like, Pat's like, don't worry, we'll handle this. And it is that realization that, Beth's mom was kind of like, right, we got so caught up in the glam of the adventure of like, oh my god, like our daughter being a superhero that we kind of forget, like, yeah, there is a cost to it. There is a bad side to it. Because like, they didn't have to worry about it too much because they didn't have to worry about all the like dangerous situations she was involved in, and they weren't in the know about it. They just know like, oh my god, you're a superhero, and they didn't see her like, right, fighting a bad guy. Even the Uncle Calypso thing, they weren't there for that. But this is an example of like, yeah, this is what heroes have to deal with. I mean, Courtney was in pretty bad shape herself. That wasn't last season, was it? Wasn't that season? That was season 1, I believe, when she ended up in the hospital. I believe that was season 1. So, it might have even been season 2. I just don't remember. I think that was season 1. But either way, so it is kind of that very scary situation and that realization about that. And even her mom being like, you know what, I'm going to call Beth right now to kind of be like, oh, you know, probably doesn't want to, like, be overbearing again, but probably wants to be like, no, I do want to protect you. Like, you're a superhero, I understand that, but you're still my baby girl type of thing, you know? So, but other than that, luckily, Dr. Migniter shows up and, you know, Chuck's willing to help out because, well, for one, he's able to examine Sylvester, and we finally get the answer to how Sylvester's alive all these years. Basically, using the cosmic staff for so long, it imbued her with some of its cosmic energy. And the example he uses is Ginny and the lantern ring, how she ended up absorbing it and basically becoming a lantern ring and stuff herself. Is like, wait, am I becoming a cosmic staff? It's like, no, whether you're not expressing the power the way she did, your body's just absorbing it. So you were basically in like almost this interesting cosmic stasis for the past 10 years, and it was just like recovering your body the entire time. And now, so he has an accelerated healing factor to some extent. It's not like it's not like a Deathstroke healing factor or anything like that, but it is like a, I use that because I know Deathstroke's one of those heroes that definitely has one. I think Superman has one to some extent, like obviously when he absorbs the sun's rays. I think him and Kara, like, they recover faster, so either way, I think it is interesting to know that about him, but it does kind of, you know, it starts getting to that territory because especially Chuck, like, doesn't miss the whole being Dr. Migniter whole situation, because for him it's like he's got his wife, he's got his daughter, but also the fact is that on top of all of that, you have the situation of passing the mantle on to Beth has been the most satisfying thing of his life. I mean, truth be told, is amongst them, he's the only one that's ever, I mean, sadly because everyone else is dead, but he's the only one that's been able to pass on his legacy, like, officially. I mean, granted, Beth had already kind of taken up the mantle, but having his blessing, too, on top of it, you know, it's like, right, you don't have to worry about two Dr. Midnights, like, Dr. Midnighter and Dr. Midnight hanging around. It's like, no, you do your thing. I'm satisfied being a doctor. I've got my practice, and I've got my family. You know, for Sylvester, once again, it's like being Starman is all he has, and without that, it's like, well, what do I have? So, Pat is trying to help with that, but for him, it's like, maybe I should give up on it, because, like, I'm turning into that old man who clings to his old glory days, and it's like, maybe Starman should stay that in the past, you know? Which I love Pat being like, yeah, you made some mistakes. I mean, you destroyed the supermarket. You tried to kill the Shade, Sportsmaster, Tigress, the gambler, and your mess ups have been a great example for Courtney on how to live a balanced life. He's like, oh, I'm glad I could be that example. But it's like, yes, but you could play the role of a mentor, like he's like, wait, like kind of a mentor role like you, which is always, once again, it's almost that thing of Sylvester being Sylvester. It's like, he can be such a dick, because when they were watching that Clint Eastwood movie, it's like, no, I say the lines. Like, oh, well, what do I say? Well, you say nothing because you're that guy, the guy who's about to get shot. I'm like, no matter what their dynamic is, he will always, like, try and put Pat down to something. I don't even know if he recognizes he's doing that, because in his eyes, Pat will always be his sidekick, and it's like, well, Pat's now Courtney and the JSA's sidekick, but he's more so like a mentorship to them. I mean, because even Pat hasn't even passed the mantle on to Mike, you know, so it's that whole situation of it. But what I really think is so interesting about that is, like, him wanting to quit and kind of recognize, like, I probably should quit. And even I was like, I think you should, because you probably are causing more trouble doing what you're doing, you know? But I think that he's going to have, after talking with Pat, even Pat giving him the suit, it changed his mind. I was like, you know what? I am going to give this a go. I'm going to try and approach this differently, you know? Because I did watching something about bounty hunters, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if that... I mean, you have superhero experience, so being a bounty hunter could kind of be up in your alley. I mean, it used to be kind of doing a superhero thing. It could be something he does by the end of this season or whatever, like when he officially leaves and passes it on to Courtney, that maybe that's when... maybe that's when he'll get, like, I would assume that, I feel like that's a very befitting job for him, you know, because, like, Pat's like, hey, you have a family here and it's us, but it's like, also at the same time, it's like, yeah, but still, like, you know, having your own family is like, because now it's just like, because it's so interesting, because, like, Pat was riding his coattails to some extent. I'm sure some people saw that for so long with the JSA, but now it's a situation of now Pat's kind of taking the lead, and now Sylvester has to follow him. Once you could see that constant, like, him, that being a, things he has to kind of somewhat come to terms with, but he's also fighting it so hard. I love the whole thing of, like, yeah, that Crusher's a maniac. It's like, oh, that is funny. He literally said the same thing about you being a maniac. And that's not funny, because you're totally right. He's completely crazy. Because I did love that Crusher was like, hey, man, I just showed up, wanted to bring a beer, heard what happened to you. He's like, yeah, I used to pop beers, because it was like, he's like, no, I knew it wasn't you guys because you don't hit that hard. And Crusher being like, no, we do hit hard. And it's like, he saying you're not the ones who attacked him, but you felt the pride as villains to be like, no, take that back, we do hit hard, like, to make a point. But it's like, hey, like, I used to kick back and take beers anytime you kicked our butts. So it's like, hey, wanted to extend the olive branch, and it's like, oh, you're watching this movie, I want to kick it too. Chugs the beer, crushes on his hand. Like, I love how much of a, like, frat bro he is. And I also love that while that's happening, Paul is checking in on Barbara, and Tim is like, Barbara, Babs, yeah, absolutely. You want something, coffee, 2 sugars, 2 sugars of milk? She's like, yeah. She's just so confused. She's like, what's going on here? And Paula's like, oh, so it's what was his name? Tom, what was it? It's like, oh, Tim. Yeah. Things are good. She's like, really? Oh, he was all about your idea and everything. It's like, cool. He's like, oh, I love that he's straining, and it's breaking him to be like, oh, like, you're the absolute best, Barb. I love that so much. And Barbara it'll probably be a while before she finds out that Paula was the one behind that, which I think is super adorable. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'm like, oh, so So at least they're kind of mending fences a little bit. It's like, bygones be bygones, considering our history and everything. It's kind of like, we'll bury the hatchet. So I do love that stuff just happens in Blue Valley, and it's like, how are you going to explain that? It's like, how did that whole supermarket thing get explained? Don't worry about it. What about Jakeem and Mike trying to find out, because later on it comes up about who potentially a suspect could be, and it could be Dragon King, and it's like, well, what are we going to do about that? Well, we should go find him ourselves, so that way we can prove ourselves, because no one really trusts us. We're just kind of like we're the runts of the group, so we got to prove ourselves. And it's like, well, I thought your dad hid the keys to Stripe. It's like, well, maybe you could wish for him. And then a whole bunch of keys flew out the bathroom, and like the bathroom door came off its hinge. And I'm like, you're there, and no one's going to question anything. You're just like speed walking past. I'm like, how are you just able to just walk away from that? They're not going to have like a million questions like, where are these keys from? Is this some kind of twisted little like school prank or something like that? Maybe that'll come up later, maybe not. Maybe just kind of like shut up and just move on. But another angle to this episode, interesting enough, is I want to add this because it's a very small thing. Yolanda's family situation continues to be kind of rough. Just like, it's everything because of Cindy, of how her family treats her. Like, I mean, we really never got to know what her family, I think we might have gotten a peek at that before the pictures went out and stuff like that. But it's such a shame that, like, once again, I said this back in season 1, it sucks so much that they put so much on her, like it's her fault. Like, she, I mean, it's a thing teenagers probably shouldn't be doing. Not probably, definitely shouldn't be doing, because it's like, you don't want to take the chance that's out. I mean, once again, I said it before too, it's like, it's a thing adults deal with. It's not just a kid thing. It's a technology thing. It's just like, once you kind of, you shared a picture with the wrong person. I won't go down that path again, but it's like, the fact that she still can't escape that. It was still there a little bit here and there last season when her mom was trying to bring it up during church and stuff like that. But even, I think it was the preacher being like, maybe kind of slow your roll, kind of like calm down, because even he kind of recognized like her mom's kind of out of pocket for her. But the fact is her entire family turned on her like that, and she's still dealing with the ramifications of it. She's like, hey, I'm on work. It's like, it's a school night. She's like, please, Mom. And then she immediately was like, oh, I bet you told everyone about your dad. She's like, no, why would I do that? It's no one else's business. And she's like, okay, whatever money you make, the tips, it goes into your college fund. It's like, yeah, I know, Mom. Like, the fact is she's so untrustworthy because of this one mistake. She's like, that's that thing of like, she's always kind of been the perfect kid, and she did this one mistake. A mistake that wasn't even her fault, but it is a thing of like, I think just, culture, her family's culture and everything. It's probably just a thing of like, from a cultural perspective, it's like brought shame upon the family in a very, and I feel like she can't escape that. And I thought that was kind of like a very heartbreaking scene to just see him like, oh, like her mom just giving her such a rough time, And the fact is her mom would immediately be like, oh, I bet you told everyone about it. I was like, why would I tell anyone about that? Like, because she almost made it sound like, oh, you're parading that information around. It's like, no, like, that's family business. She probably doesn't even let the others, the rest of the JSA probably doesn't even know about that, so. And, now she's staring at the helmet and stuff because a realtor's coming by, so they must be selling their house. They must be moving somewhere else. So kind of showcasing like, all right, there's stuff going on with Yolanda's family that she hasn't really opened up to the others about. I mean, with everything she's dealing with on top of all that, especially like a lot of last season. I don't know if some of these were like elements that were happening in the background of last season that she didn't really talk about either. We'll have to wait and see. But the other element to this is at the crime scene, they found a single piece of evidence. And working with Dr. Midnight or Chuck, they ended up figuring out it's related to Dragon King. And immediately you're like, okay, well, we know Cindy was at the crime scene, so I'm like, it most likely came from her. But because now they're wondering, like, well, if the Dragon King's bad, do we really need to warn Cindy? And I was about to do it again. Courtney. I was literally about to say Breck. Courtney was had to explain to him, was like, right, I never told you about in the Shadowlands, but I saw Cindy's upbringing. It wasn't like love. It was super abusive. Like, her dad's gone and dead now, so she's finally free of him, and she'd never work with him again. And the moment that element got introduced, and especially what was going on with her a little bit in the episode, I was like, wait, did her dad implant a piece of himself in her? So I was like, is it like a little bit of a thing of he's popping out of her like a very Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of situation? I was wondering if that was what it could be. And maybe there's still some element to that. Because he could have implanted, if anything ever happened to him, maybe like it's been festering the entire time, but there's a part of him that's coming like buried beneath the surface. But what we get at the very end, though, implies that it probably, like, that's why Cindy was at the crime scene, because she probably doesn't remember because she blacked out. Like, I figured something was going on and that's why she was looking. But now maybe we have full answers for the files. Like, either one, she had nothing to do with killing the gambler or attacking Sylvester. I don't think she does. I think it is just the skin is from her because she's transforming and she's looking into a way to stop it. Like she's becoming more and more like her father. It's there, but I think now after all this time, the countless experiments have finally like borne fruit, and now she's turning more into him. She's trying to stop it. So that's what I'm thinking it is. But there's still the possibility that it's a Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing of like she's losing control and blacking out, and now it's becoming a thing of the dragon is taking over more and more. But I'm thinking it's the first one, that the scale is from when she first showed up at the crime scene, and it's like, well, now I'm like, yeah, her peeling her skin off like a reptile and being like, oh my god, it's there, like, crap, like, I'm running out of time before this completely takes over. But also, all this is going to point to me, because she hasn't been in contact with the JSA, so she doesn't know that they are connecting this to Dragon King, but in actuality it's going to connect to her. So we'll see, but I'm leaning more towards a former. Like I said, it's just a scale from like when she was, it's just DNA from when she was there and it just came off of her. So she's mutating more and more, but she had nothing to do with the murder or the attack. But it's going to look like it's her. So, but like I said, there's always the possibility that it's just like I said, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing. Either way. Another element to this episode is Cameron. Obviously, I should have figured he didn't know everything because of the fact is he was still hanging around Courtney and there were still those feelings. But the fact is he was still weary around her made me go like, do you know? So it's like his grandparents never told him. They know about Courtney because obviously, Jordan knew about Courtney, so that's not too much of a surprise, but his grandparents are pushing him more and more to use his powers, and they're like, oh, use this tea, it'll help you get to that point where you can control it again, but also, we're getting rid of this art because you need to more so focus on your powers. It's like, he's already struggling with painting and, you know, being able to do his art, and now that's kind of being taken away from him. Like, his grandparents want him to fully embrace, was it this cryokinesis? It's something that's been in their family, and it's like, oh, we've used it for good, and you're like, oh, so your family's really spun this around. I mean, in their mind, it might be like, we have done it for good. It's all for the greater good. Because what Jordan was planning for it, like, it wasn't completely evil. There was like, okay, some sentimentality of understanding why he did what he did. And his wife was understanding about, but I don't know how much, like, maybe he did have some altruistic elements to it even beforehand. Maybe that's why his wife supported him. But then it was like, do a little wrong just for the greater good. So maybe, because we saw that in season 1, she was super supportive of the plan. And that's what threw me for a loop where I was like, because it's all about mind controlling people, but it's about swaying the country to kind of pass the laws they want to, like to do the good. It just means we have to basically enslave people to kind of sway them and the country in the direction we want to. That was at least Jordan's perspective on, you know, what the others were going to do with that. They had their own their own reasons for doing it, but his were somewhat altruistic to some extent. But we have no full idea, like, what the rest of that family is like. Like, maybe his grandparents, like, have done this. Jordan's parents, Cameron's grandparents, kind of did a similar thing. I don't know. Either way, Cameron ended up losing control of his powers around Courtney, and she's freaking out a little bit because it's like, right, she hasn't had to really deal with the whole frost power thing since Icicle, and it's like, cool. And once again, Cameron doesn't know about, not for one, he has no idea about Stargirl having any involvement with his dad's death, because he now knows, like, his dad was murdered, but he's like, yeah, my grandparents don't tell me the truth. It's like, yeah, they probably don't want to break your heart by telling you, like, we know your girlfriend Stargirl, she was behind it. It's like, well, because they probably also have to admit, it's like, wait, if she's a hero, why would she go after my parents? Like, it's, you know, I'm sure they'll spin the story when that eventually comes out, but Courtney's in this tough spot of like, wow, I'm like super okay with your powers because of all, he's like, you know, it must be hard for you. She's like, what? You know, he's like, someone normal. She's like, yeah, me, super normal. but she's so, like, okay with everything. She's not freaking. He's like, how are you so calm about it? And so for her, it's about helping him get more control of his power, which is interesting considering, like, Sylvester's doing the same to her, teaching her, was it the shooting star technique? Which also, I think that's going to be interesting to find out more about what kind of effect the staff has been having on Courtney. To be fair, Sylvester had it a lot longer than Courtney did. So, you know, she hasn't been exposed to the cosmic staff for long periods of time like he was. Plus, he was like Starman, like, all the time. She's not Stargirl all the time. Plus, once again, she hasn't had the staff nearly as long as Sylvester originally did. So, a lot of that comes in play. But, you know, some of that's got to still be leaking into her. And what the full effects of that will be in the long run, I'm sure it's going to be similar effects that's happening to Sylvester, but probably to, like, a much smaller extent. Either way, her helping Cameron by, it's like, because he's like, yeah, my dad was a good guy and stuff like that. My dad was a hero. It's like, yikes. Because I had talked about this previously, like, I'd read an article or something like that, like, glimpsed an article, I shouldn't say read, glimpsed an article kind of hinting at, like, Cameron, he could go one of two ways. So I don't know whether the character he plays has gone two ways, or basically the route Cameron could go two different character routes. Like, there's a Frost villain character he could be, or a Frost hero character he could be. I don't know if that's what they're saying, or whether it's just this character maybe typically is a villain, but could go a villain or hero route in the show. I didn't read too much into it. I kind of didn't want to. I don't want to spoil anything for myself. So I think they're kind of hinting to that here. But he's under the impression like his dad's a good guy until he finds out your dad's super not. Your dad was a super, super bad guy. So the leader of a team of super, super bad guys, which that in conjunction with knowing like, cool, the rest of those bad guys who knew your dad, maybe they'd end up talking to you, explaining who your dad was, and they're reforming. So it's like, right, my dad could have reformed too. So there's complications upon complications there that I'm curious to see how Courtney handles that. Because Courtney ends up taking that advice that Sylvester gave her about her powers and, like, focus on the love you have for your mom and dad and use that to express your power. You might, because he hasn't been able to paint since he drew that mural for his dad last season. And now it's like, cool, like, apply your powers and you can use them, you know? Because she is like, I know who you are at your core, that you're a good, kind, sweet person. And I know that will be reflected in your powers and I know you won't hurt me. So he uses his powers and kind of makes it snow, and him and Courtney share a kiss, which are like, that's going to complicate things when he finds out the truth about you being Stargirl, and once his grandparents, I keep saying parent, when his grandparents shift the narrative to be like, you're the bad guy that killed his dad, that's going to complicate things. So, but for now, it was a nice, beautiful moment. I mean, like, there's been a thing between her and Cameron for a while, and for things to finally get to this point, it's nice, but eventually, I think poetically, them standing on opposite sides. But I mean, you never know, because I mean, look at Henry, and obviously look at Cindy and Artemis now. So, I mean, to be fair, Artemis was kind of like unaware and just not on this side of, you know, even of being a bad guy until Cindy ended up recruiting her. But like Henry shifted over and helped and was, you know, a good guy. So it showcases, you know, like I said, even Cindy playing the good role now, but it's still like out of self-preservation. She's working with the JSA. But, you know, Cameron's future, I think the scales could tip either way, depending on which wolf he ends up feeding, you know, inside of him, the good, the bad, you know, so we'll ultimately have to wait and see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.